What's up, everyone? This is Mr. Wibby, and today we will be going over the beginning of slavery in the Americas. All right, so our objective for today, the learner will be able to explain how diseases, agriculture, and race contributed to the development of slavery in America. All right, so our essential questions, we have four. What is an agrarian economy, and why would slavery be important in this type of society? What is the significance of the year 1619? Were the first Africans in the New World slaves? Are Africans the only people to be enslaved in the New World? All right, so let's go ahead and start it off. What is an agrarian society? Well, an agrarian society is a society where agriculture dominates. Workers are needed for the production of food. Towns are centered around farming. Trade becomes an important asset in the economic needs of this type of society. So an agrarian society is a society that's based on farming and the production of crops on the farm, just to simplify it. What is slavery? Slavery is a state and a condition in which a person is forced to labor or work without any type of compensation or pay. The person has little to no rights and is treated as chattel or property. Chattel is another word for property. So just to kind of go back in here, it's a state and a condition. So not only is it a condition, it's something that you are, it's a state. That means that it becomes a mind state, a mentality, and you are forced to work without compensation. That's another word for pay. And then labor is another word for work. Chattel is another word for property. Let's move on. Why has slavery been so popular throughout human history? So the first thing that I want to note is America was not the first country, place, or civilization with slavery. African people were not the first people to be held in slavery. Slavery is one of the oldest institutions in the world. And why slavery is so popular is because slavery allows a person or a country to own people and maximize profits because those persons do not need to be paid. So slavery is popular because you can pretty much force people to work for you without having to pay them. Many of the times, the only thing that you need to do is feed the people who are enslaved so that they don't die, because you want them to create or finish whatever project that you guys are doing. All right, what is the origin of slavery? There is no conclusive origin of slavery, but there are very ancient accounts of slavery existing in all ancient societies throughout history. So ancient Egypt has slavery, ancient China and ancient India. We see so many references to slavery that let us know that slavery did exist. Traditionally, people enslave other people when they went to war and they conquered another group of people, or a person was enslaved whenever they owed someone else for a debt. In some cases, people were placed in bondage when they committed crime. So the three main reasons why a person historically would go into slavery: their group lost a war to another group, they owed money, or they committed a crime. Beginning of slavery in the Americas. So let's look at slavery in the Americas. Enslavement. So to start off slavery in the Americas, we have to first look at the enslavement of Native Americans. Okay, here we go. Initially, when the Spanish came to the New World, they turned to enslaving Native Americans. Here were the problem with enslaving Native Americans. Number one, Native Americans understood the terrain of the New World better than Europeans, so they escaped. Number two, Native Americans were willing to fight the Europeans for their lands as well as their freedoms. And then number three, diseases like smallpox, typhus, and especially measles killed off many of the Native Americans. All right, plantation agriculture. Let's look at plantation agriculture. What is plantation agriculture, you may ask? Plantation agriculture was a mainstay of the colonial economic structure, starting when the Spaniards conquered the New World. Recall, Portugal was the first country to explore West Africa, so they would be the first country to engage in the African slave trade. Spain and Portugal developed very profitable sugar plantations. As England began to explore the New World, they too would look to become a major agricultural player. English and the slave trade. In the 1600s, English tobacco farmers in North America needed workers for their plantations. With the lack of Native American workers, they too needed another source of labor or work. They too wanted a cheap workforce that would help them maximize their profits. So English colonists turned to indentured servitude. Initially, the English turned to indentured servitude. The English settlers in America set up a system of indentured servitude. In Virginia, colonists suffered very high death rates, which led to labor shortages. The colonists turned to indentured servitude of Europeans and some Africans for labor in the New World. And indentured servant, is a person that signed a contract to work for 4 to 7 years for those who paid for their journey to the New World. So in all, most indentured servants were of European descent. They were white, English, Anglo-Saxon, Protestants. Those people basically wanted to come to the New World, and in order to pay for their stay in the New World, they became indentured servants. Also, there were some Africans that came from Europe who were also indentured servants. In 1619, when the Africans touched down in the Americas, not all of them were slaves. So here we go. In 1619 is important because it's the first time that Africans came to what would eventually be the United States. So in 1619, a Dutch ship brought the first Africans to Virginia. Many of those Africans that came to Virginia were not slaves, but indentured servants. Some others were slaves, though. The Middle Passage. So enslavement was a horrible experience for slaves. Most of the Africans had been captured and sold into slavery by other warring African tribes or nations. The African nations profited from selling slaves to Europeans. When I say Europeans, it's more specifically Portugal. The captives were chained around their necks and then marched to the coast. That journey could be as long as 1,000 miles. The Middle Passage was the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean that enslaved Africans were forced to endure. The Middle Passage, once again, Africans were packed like cargo in the lower deck of slave ships. The slaves were chained together and crammed. Many laid next to dead bodies, feces, which would what we call doo-doo, puke, and other unsterile conditions. African diaspora. The African diaspora was the forced migration of Africans to the New World, both North and South America. Many estimates suggest that anywhere between 120 to 140 million Africans were sent to the New World. Other estimates suggest that anywhere from 10 to 30 million Africans died or committed suicide on the trip from Africa to the New World. Slavery and the slave codes. Africans lost their traditional names, language, religion, and other parts of their cultures to slavery in the Americas. The English understood that they had to control the minds of their slaves in order to keep them from rebelling. So they established a set of slave codes or laws specifically for African slaves. The colonists seemed to be forming an institution geared towards controlling the lives of African slaves. So the slave codes permitted, for example, slave codes permitted slaves or African people from knowing how to read. It permitted white people from teaching African slaves how to read. There were other codes that forbid Africans from marrying white or European people. There were other codes that prevented Africans from being outside after dark. These are the kind of laws that were passed that are called slave codes. There are many more. We'll go more into detail later. All right, so this is the conclusion of my presentation on slavery in the New World. Go ahead and complete the assignment.